Happy December the 12th, whisky fans, and thanks for joining me. Door number 12. I think we've had some pretty good drams so far. I mean, I've got all the partly consumed dram in front of me, and nearly one all over the floor there. And I think there have been a couple of disappointments. I mean, the Tamnavulin's okay. Jura is Jura. But apart from two, they've all been at least good. Even Tamnavulin, I think the red wine cask is just not my preference. Tamnavulin do make better, slightly better whiskey than that. But we've had some interesting drams. We've had some... They're all pretty affordable. We haven't had anything really expensive in here, I don't think. But they're all good quality stuff. So let's see if we can continue that theme on December the 12th. Smells pleasant. I don't think there's any peat in this one. At least not at this early stage. Colour looks about the same as, well, perhaps a little bit less red and a little bit darker than the Ledaig Rioja. That smells pretty good though. Lovely, rich, sweet caramel. A little bit salted caramel perhaps. Very golden nose for those synesthesia tasters out there. Some grains, lightly toasted grains. You can tell that it's a barley spirit, which is always good. I think this one's reminding me a little bit of like a Glengoyne, and so far I think this one's probably a little bit better than the Glengoyne 10 that we already had on, like, what was that, day 1 or 2? A little bit better than that, I think. Just a little bit richer. Interesting notes on the nose. Possibly a little bit of sherry, but kind of like a mixed cask vatting, probably bourbon and sherry. And the sherry is more of a nutty sherry, perhaps like a Fino or an Amontillado style sherry. Lots of nuttiness actually coming through on the nose now. Really noticing that now. So yeah, sweet caramel, nutty, almond, hazelnut. Good, very good. Nice intensity, sweetness, good body on the nose. Let's see how it tastes. Actually getting some port type notes on the palate. Reminds me a little bit of, well, port, chocolate, nutty, cocoa. Like a rich, dark, raisiny kind of port. Not overly sweet, as port can sometimes be, but chocolate, fruit and nut, that kind of thing. Not on the nose, but on the palate, this reminds me a little bit of Glenmorangie Quinta Reuben, or Quinta Reuben, like the 14-year-old port finished Glenmorangie. I think it's still 14 years old, it was at one point. It's really good though. On the nose, I'm starting to get a few more port notes on the nose as well. Port, or possibly, I think it's got port notes in there, but I'm going to guess that this is something like an Amontillado sherry. There's sherry notes on this one that remind me a little bit of something like a weaker version of the Glen Scotia 12-year-old seasonal release, the one that I reviewed, which was Amontillado casks. I think it was Amontillado casks that they used on that anyway, Glen Scotia. Probably be getting another Glen Scotia seasonal release very soon. That's up there. Yeah, Amontillado sherry casks, limited edition. Yeah, a little bit like that. Probably not a cask strength release on this one though. Lovely, rich, oily nuttiness. And a little bit of a kind of plasticine note that you quite often get in some sherry finished whiskies. Lovely, really long, lingering finish. Lots of raisins and nuts, like fruit and nut, milk chocolate on the late palate. Still got it now. Really nice, nutty, raisiny note. So what could that be? Oh, apparently it could be a Glen Scotia if they've used some of those Amontillado casks again, but probably not, because I'm just basing that on the cask type. Who else makes whiskey like this? Possibly like a Glenrothes, or it's not going to be a Macallan, because you're not going to get a £100 whiskey in this advent calendar probably. Because anything, I think that it's probably going to be a 46% whiskey, and anything that's properly presented at 46% from Macallan, you're going to need a second mortgage for. Really, really nice, proper sherry though. It's not your typical sherry flavour dip cask finish where it just adds a bunch of sweetness. And obviously in those whiskies, a lot of that sweetness is coming from the fact that they've used sherry treated American oak. It's not that, it's proper sherry on this one. And it's really good. So this is going to be an even bigger problem for the leaderboard, because this one is absolutely apples and oranges comparison compared to things like the Smoky Scot and the Ledaig Rioja. To remind myself what that Fettercairn was like. Yeah, that Fettercairn is really good stuff. But how the hell do you put that on a linear scale? Something which is obviously a well-made, at least reasonably well presented. Not sure about the colour, possibly natural, don't know. But how do you compare something like that up against like a 5-year-old Islay Caol? And that's a large part of why I've kind of shied away from giving grades and scores to whiskies now. Because in my opinion, it's always subjective, at least to some extent. When you're comparing different styles, everyone will prefer one style to another. So eventually you get to a point where you're basically scoring your preferences to some extent. It's unavoidable. But how do you compare something like this to that Smoky Scot? I mean, I'm tempted to put this in at the number 2 spot, but you've really got 3 entirely different whiskies. With this, that I don't yet know what it is, but it's obviously got some good sherry in it. The Smoky Scot 5-year-old Caol, massive young raw peat bomb, and the Ledaig Rioja cask. Look at the red colour to that. You can really see that red. Beautiful. But you've got 3 entirely different whiskies, but I think it's going to have to go in at the number 2 spot. Please don't be a Macallan. I don't think it will be, because the only Macallan it could be is like the double cask, which is already too expensive, and it's only 40% because it's crap, because it's Macallan. And that's not a 40% whiskey. It is a Murray McDavid, and it's 44.5% ABV, so a little bit below 46, but absolutely enough. And it's a Murray McDavid Tullibardine, and it's cask craft PX finish. So a little bit off the mark there. I was getting, well, like I said, like Amontillado sherry, maybe a little bit of port kind of influence. It's actually PX, but that's a really good PX cask. I like that a lot. That's going to go in at number 2. In hindsight, does it smell and taste like PX? It's not as sweet and cloying and kind of obtrusive as I usually find PX to be. On the finish, that sweetness does kind of suggest PX, but still, I'd say it's a PX which is kind of closer to like an Amontillado than the average PX is, because I really, really like it. And I quite often don't love PX finished whiskies, but that's a really, really good one. Be interesting to see how much that costs. If it costs the same as a Macallan, I'm going to be pissed off. Being a Murray McDavid, it's It's anyone's guess really, isn't it? It's a reasonably good presentation at 44.5. How to even find the thing, that's the problem. PX finish, let's search for that. Is that the right one? There's a sherry finish, which is £34 a bottle. So that's probably not what we're talking about here, because this is described as PX. And this one they're saying that it's a sherry hogshead. So I'm not sure about that. This one is 44.5% though. So if this isn't it, I'm guessing it's probably going to be a similar price, because it doesn't mention an age statement. It's 44.5, so it's probably, you're looking at £30 to £35 for a bottle, which is really good value. Let me know what you thought about that one, and I'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.